Hello, I'm Josh.
And I'm Elijah.
Today we'll be reviewing the great DreamWorks movie The Prince of Egypt. Is it accurate to what's based on its original source?
Woo!
Wait, what was the movie about?
Allow me to illuminate. Okay, so The Prince of Egypt. This movie is about the protagonist named Moses. What really starts off the film is when Moses' mother and his two siblings, Aaron and Miriam, send Moses off into the Nile River as a child to save him from being killed by the Pharaoh's wrath of eliminating all Hebrew children and to give him a better life. Before Moses does this, she decides to sing him one last lullaby and then eventually sending him off in the Nile River. Upon reaching the end of the Nile River, Moses is found by the Pharaoh's wife with her child Ramesses. When she noticed Moses, she decides to adopt him, and from thereforth he would become the Prince of Egypt. Time skip later into the future, Moses and Ramesses are riding horses together, racing each other, causing all sorts of destruction in Egypt, even taking down the famous Egyptian statue's nose. After returning back home, the pharaoh, who is also Moses and Ramesses' father, scolds the both of them and tells Ramesses to get his act together as he's next in line to becoming pharaoh. A bit later, Ramesses and Moses are laid to a banquet where Ramesses would be named Prince Regent. In this scene is also where another character is introduced named Zipporah, who is taken hostage to be tribute to Ramesses, but was quickly given to Moses. Once she is sent to Moses' quarters, she quickly escapes her capture. While this happens, Moses decides to follow her, and on the way of fleeing, she runs into Moses' biological siblings, Aaron and Miriam, who are helping Zipporah by giving her water for her long journey. After she takes her leave, Moses' sister Miriam decides to speak to Moses and tells him the truth of his life, that he's not the Prince of Egypt and that God saved him to become their deliverer. Moses was just about to leave, Miriam decided to sing the same lullaby that Moses' mother sang him when he was a baby. This was the pivotal moment where Moses realized what Miriam told him was true and began to realize that his whole life is a lie.
Oh right, then at one point a slave was being abused for being exhausted and struggling to work until Moses stepped in and killed the Egyptian man, then fled and removed all his parts of prince life and eventually found Tziporah and joined the Meditype and learned and grew as a changed man, and over time he ended up being and marrying with Tziporah. While he was living there, he met God, who sent him on a quest back to free his people, the slaves of Egypt. Once Moses went back, he told Ramses, who was now the new pharaoh, that he is a Hebrew, not a prince of Egypt, and the God of the Hebrew told him that he needs to let his people go. After Ramses refused to let them go, God sent 10 deadly plagues, which tore everything in Egypt, and with the final plague, death of the firstborn, which meant that every firstborn of every Egyptian family would be smited, including Ramses' son. With this last strike, Ramses let go of Moses' people to be free. Leading the people, Moses guides the slaves to a new life, traveling across the world together. And everything went smooth sailing until Ramses tried to attack the Hebrew with his soldiers. However, before they could lay any hands on them, God sent a wall of fire to protect the Hebrew to buy them time to escape. And with the staff God has given to Moses, he does God's wonders and separates the Red Sea for the Hebrew people to travel through. Once they were close enough to land, the wall of fire disappeared, and Ramses and his soldiers resumed their attack, but the wall of water collapsed on them, finally setting the Hebrews free.
I really did like that movie.
It was pretty good.
What was your favorite part?
I like the consequences of Ramses repeatedly refusing to admit defeat and the release of God's people, therefore causing the 10 plagues, with its horrible disastrous effects it caused on the people of Egypt and Ramses' child going boom boom.
A bit morbid, but alright.
Yeah, but what about you?
Watching this film was really interesting. For me, I really enjoyed the character development Moses went through. How he thought so highly of himself, but then he understood that he was no different than the slaves that built the empire with their bare hands. I also liked how even his appearance changed so much. For instance, the straight black wig he would wear on his head. You could say it was hiding a greater truth of who he really was with his curly brown hair. As well as the parallel with his mother and his sister singing the lullaby, which was something that I thought was a really nice touch for the story and how it was part of what reminded Moses of who he really is.
Yeah, that was a pretty nice touch.
But was it accurate?
I don't know. You tell me.
Well, according to sources, The Prince of Egypt is more like an adaptation of the events of Exodus within the Bible, but it's still close to the storyline. However, specific liberties were taken. For instance, the major relationship between Moses and Ramesses, as these two were never related in the Bible, or how even his brother Aaron was never really involved with Moses' journey whatsoever in the film, which he's majorly involved with Moses as a spokesperson during the Exodus. However, despite these differences, it didn't really take that much away from the film and still ended the same way with the Bible. Something neat to know is that when they created this movie, the creators took the stories from 600 experts who worked on Egypt's past, like archaeologists, religious leaders, historians, etc., to try and make this as close to the original as possible with just some creative liberties.
And despite the sort of little holes, the film was still faithful to the events of Exodus, with the things like the 10 plagues, the river turning into blood, and the eventual freedom of the slaves. A neat detail within the movie is the color coordination between the Hebrews, Moses, and the rest of the Egyptian royalty, as the colors of the Hebrews is red, showing the hierarchy and the difference between the two, which is ironic, how even when Moses was considered a prince of Egypt, but he was truly still a part of his people.
Including how over time, Moses started to wear more red with his final look in the film compared to the beginning. I already know I said this before, but I honestly really enjoyed this film. It gave me more sort of a visual aid for context of how things worked back then in the time period of Egypt, what the culture was like, how the hierarchy worked between the slaves and the higher people of Egypt, and more on the role of the pharaoh.
Yeah, with the film, I've gotten pretty good understanding of the oppression of the slaves, and more after watching the bad conditions they went through, and how Moses rose up against them, becoming a beacon of hope. And through Moses' self-journey, he discovers himself for who he truly is and his connection with God.
Oh yeah, I gotta say, this movie did answer my curiosity on how people would react to the words spoken about God in Egypt, like especially with Ramesses showing his response to how Moses was talking about God to him, but he wouldn't listen and would just be stubborn and wouldn't let his people go. It really just shows how they can really be stuck to their own ways of things, and I really understood that a lot more.
I do want to know how Ramses was a pharaoh in reality and how the 10 plagues were in the Bible in reality too.
Well, maybe we'll figure that out another time.
Maybe so, but thank you everyone for watching and have a good day and night, and don't let the bed bugs bite. Bye!